All right. Hello, everyone. Happy June 13th, 2024. It's the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. We are live here on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, whatever that is, a couple other places. I am the schlub on the left, Chris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects, and that handsome, lovely, much younger gentleman on the right-hand side, that is Matthew Fairburn. You can find Matthew Fairburn, who is the Sabres writer for The Athletic.com. You can find Matthew's work at theathletic.com/Sabres.
I think that would work. Actually, you can even go to the New York Times. Oh, it's much more complicated.
You're so swanky.
NewYorkTimes.com/athletic. Our URL is New York Times now, and our font has changed. We got a little makeover there on our site. Nothing too dramatic, but theathletic.com/Sabres is probably the simplest way to get there.
And I just use the app anyway. It's the best app in the business. Smooth, easy to use. There's your free plug for The Athletic. And you can go to theathletic.com if you are on your computer. Check out the latest subscription deal. It is always very affordable. They do a good job making it easy for you to subscribe. All right, Matthew, I'm drinking coffee tonight. I had a long day. I am not having any tequila or vodka or anything like that. I am getting ready for summer, which means I'm trying to look good naked. So there you go. So coffee it is tonight. Hardly any calories in this. No cream, no sugar. I am loaded for bear. Wanted to get together with you. Quick episode tonight. We went for an hour and a half last time. I think people probably thought that was obnoxious, but we haven't been together. We weren't together for about 6 weeks, so we had to kind of get it out of our system, get back on track. And tonight I thought we could do a little quick hit episode and tee up the unrestricted free agency class of 2024. So NHL draft's coming up in 2 weeks? And that's going to be starting on June 28th. And right after that, like free agency kicks off. I think it's July 1. I don't even know anymore. Things are moving so fast, but July 1 is what I have written down on my Post-it note for free agency. And look, I think the proper way to get into it tonight, Matthew, is let's talk about who was, on the Sabres roster last year that has expiring contracts, what we kind of think is going to happen with some of those guys. I think we can kind of delve into, I don't know exactly how you feel about this free agency class. We should talk about that a little bit, but there's, some big names at the top. It's pretty top heavy. There's a drop off. Maybe we can kind of get a feel for what we think is realistic and what's not really realistic. We would think for the Sabres, just given maybe the cap money that we think they're going to have to spend, right? After some moves that they have to make here, some maneuvering through the offseason. And I wrote down a couple names that I think are realistic. They may not make waves in the chat. They might be boring names to some, but we got to remember what we think the Sabres need to address. There's a couple things, and we'll get into it, right? We know the power play was putrid last year. I might be looking for a little help there. And maybe creating an identity on the bottom 6 forward group. So when I throw some names out there tonight, Matthew, there's a kind of a flavor. Those that I'm setting the table for the flavor of guys that I've looked at that I think the Sabres would realistically call. Okay. With that said, why don't we just kind of dive right in, talk about the 2023-2024 roster of guys that were here and who we expect to be walking away from the Sabres organization here with an expiring contract. I'll pass it over to you to kind of kick that off.
Yeah, so actually, if anybody in the chat wants to follow along, I wrote about just this today at theathletic.com/Sabres as part of my prep here for free agency, going through, because you hear the number a lot, right? The Sabres have $23 million in cap space, $23 million in cap space. Well, what does that actually mean? Because they have some housekeeping to do. So $23 million on cap friendly, which still exists here for a couple of weeks, still available to us normal folks for a few more weeks, does not account for Devin Levi in that equation. So you add Devin Levi, you go down to about 22.5 million, and you still have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's contract not counted for. Henri Jokiharju's there, that's mid-season form. You got Henri Jokiharju's contract not accounted for. Peyton Krebs not accounted for. And then a little bit of a guessing game, I guess, on what the rest of those forwards will look like. Zemgus Girgensons is a free agent. Victor Olofsson is a free agent. Tyson Jost is a free agent. Eric Robinson is a free agent. So, how I sketched it out conservatively for the purposes of this exercise is that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen gets a 4-year, $4.5 million contract. I think that's somewhere in the neighborhood. Could go longer and more expensive. I've looked at that Philip Gustafsson contract as a good comp for Luukkonen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what were the numbers on Gustafsson?
3.75 cap hit. I believe it was a 3-year deal. They're actually, his name keeps getting floated out in trade talks. So he didn't have the best year this year, but that feels like Luukkonen's floor because the numbers are similar. The career trajectory was pretty similar. And now the cap's going up. You know, maybe Luukkonen was a bit better of a prospect. So you say maybe 4.5. I'm saying conservative in the sense that I'm overshooting it, you know, to maybe, you know, see take a little bit of the money out of the coffer. I did 1.7 million for Peyton Krebs. And then, you know, that might be a little high. I can't really figure out exactly. I don't think they're going to go too aggressive with that contract, but I think you keep him on the roster. Jokiharju's qualifying offer is 2.6 million. So those guys right there eat up a good chunk of that cap space. But as it would stand, you would have 4 open forward spots. Well, you would have, I guess, depending on how you look at it, you would have 10 forwards under contract. The other person I factored in was Lukasz Rusek at 775,000
On a one-way, yeah.
one way.
Yeah.
And I did not factor in any of the prospects. And so we can talk a little bit about that. But 10 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies, leaving you with potentially 4 forwards and a defenseman, depending on how you want to break that up. Maybe you want to add 2 defensemen. Maybe you want to add 3 forwards. Maybe you want to bring back some of those other forwards that are unrestricted. And that leaves you with $13 million to get the job done. So still plenty, absolutely plenty. And there's really no excuse for them to not spend, I would say, $10 million this offseason on outside additions. Pretty easy to do and work that needs to be done on this roster. A lot of that can be maneuvered though, right? You could talk about maybe you trade Peyton Krebs, maybe you trade Jokiharju. That does create more roster spots, but they also do have Ryan Johnson, Matt Savoy, Yuri Kulik, you know, guys that maybe could also push for NHL time that could fill some of those spots on entry-level deals. But to just give a thumbnail sketch, I had, you know, entering in 4, you know, maybe 4 open spots at forward, 1 on defense, and $13 million.
Okay. Sounds reasonable. Luukkonen, yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting. That's certainly an important domino here for Kevin Adams. 4.5. My working number has been 4. I might be light. I don't know. But yeah, I guess, you know, I think you're right on track there. You know, I'm not a contract expert by any means. I say that often, but to me, that sounds reasonable, that range for him. What we're not going to do tonight or get into trade targets a little bit. So this is not like a full offseason exercise by any means. At least that's not how how I've prepared for it. Again, this was just throw some names out there, talk a little bit about them. Maybe some insight as to why they might make sense for this organization. Now, when you look at the list of unrestricted free agents, I am on cap friendly, cap unfriendly, capitals friendly, whatever we want to call them. Like I mentioned earlier, a little top heavy, right? You have Steven Stamkos at the top of the list. Love Steven Stamkos. Is it realistic? No, I didn't write him down on my list. I think Tampa's going to do what it takes to lock him up, which also could create a situation for them to maneuver through with some contracts that they currently have on the books. Maybe that comes into play if we do another episode talking about some trade targets when we get a little deeper here into this offseason. Some other names that are fun to talk about on this list that I don't think are going to be realistic for Buffalo include, but are not limited to, Sam Reinhart, Jake Gensel, Jonathan Marchessault. Player I really like, Elias Lindholm, on this list. I know he had a little bit of a questionable year, but I love Elias Lindholm. I think he'd be great. He's not on my list. Would they call him, kick the tires? Yeah, maybe. I think they might have some conversations, but would he realistically come to Buffalo? I don't know. I guess money talks. We'll see. I think we're kind of in this spot where, to get one of those guys, you might have to overpay, right? Like if you're going to get Steven Stamkos, it's extra year, extra money. I mean, you have a lot of headwinds there when you're trying to get a player of his ilk, just what he means to that franchise, and seems like he wants to be there. I still thought it was strange that they didn't negotiate with him. Like really, really odd. But they could allow him to hit the market, get some offers, bring him back. And that's something that, a little Babcock action on that one. We'll see how that plays out. But I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the forwards there on defense. Since I agree with you that I think there's an opportunity to kind of give yourself a different look with at least, introducing maybe one element to the blue line. I look at the Sabres blue line right now. I like the idea of Ryan Johnson being in the mix. You can move him up and down. I think there's benefit for him, again, maybe starting, playing some crazy minutes and playing a leading role in Rochester. But at the same time, he looked really good up in Buffalo last year with a couple different partners. So he's an interesting one as we come to this offseason. For me, I look at where they ended up with Jokiharju. I think the Sabres ended the season. It was so long ago, but I want to say they ended the season with Jokiharju playing with Dahlin. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I like that, So some of the things that I'm looking at are, who's an established player that leads by example that you might be able to get to play in your top four that has a pedigree of maybe shutting down, or at least, history of matching up with top six forwards for the opposition. I have a name that I really like. I'm curious if you like them. I think you know who it is because I may have, if you were paying attention on my text messages to you this morning, you know who I'm getting at. But other names on D, though, which are kind of interesting here. Alec Martinez, I love him. I just, 36 years old right now. I'm not sure that that's a move, that is realistic. Chris Tanev, he's going to get a lot of steam in the free agent market. That's a guy who's going to be able to pick his destination, I think. Tyson Barrie, not really what I think Sabres need. There's a couple other guys there that are interesting, but you start to get into the range then, you get into that Brett Pesce zone and things start to get really interesting on D. And I'm going to stop there. So I just wanted to kind of tee up the class. You can go to Cap Friendly and see all the names that are out there if you haven't already. Our audience, they're pretty in tune with this free agent class. They have strong opinions on what the Sabres are going to do. But should I just dive right in and just throw my obvious one out there right now for
Start it off.
Yeah, it's a different tune. It's a different tune than maybe where we were when we talked about this player. When I say the time frame, everyone's going to know where I'm going with this. But last winter, there was a player rehabbing an injury that it seemingly like we might have been the only two people in Buffalo that thought it made sense. I loved it I thought it was the best move that the Sabres could have made last winter. I no longer feel that going after Patrick Kane is the best move for the Sabres, but I do feel like it's a move that they will pursue, frankly, because this is a team that needs to aggressively market and sell tickets. And it just happens that he can still play. So when you look at Kane last year, I think he proved that he still has it, finger quotes, right? 20 goals, 7 game winners last year, 47 points in 50 games for the Detroit Red Wings. Alarmingly, only 2 of those goals were on the power play. But this is a guy, he has, I wrote it down somewhere in his career, 126 power play goals in his career. So roughly 25% of his take has been on the power play. Little less, probably 20. But look, even though he didn't do damage on the power play last year, I think he could certainly help with his scoring knack, his clutch scoring, his creativity, motion. He's a guy that likes to move. How often did we see the Sabres standing around with their thumbs in their ass last year with the man advantage? But when Byram comes in from Colorado in his first game, he's trying to tell guys to move around. They abandoned the 1-3-1, so they didn't really use a bumper. I don't know what they're going to do with Seth Apper, giving that a fresh look, but I like the idea of Patrick Kane for the marketing perspective, for the fact that he can still play. And by the way, I'm putting him up top with Tage. If you keep it
You have to.
in
Absolutely.
center, and I'm putting Kane on the right wing, cut him loose, see what can happen. Here's the other thing that's just kind of like a feel good part of it. If there's anything that could feel good with Patrick Kane, right? People are going to have their opinions of him and the human being and things that happened 5-8 years ago. And it's hard to kind of, wash some of that funk off you. I understand. Okay. He has 471 goals right now in his NHL career. Wouldn't it be cool for the hometown kid to get 500 in a Buffalo Sabres uniform? I know that doesn't matter. That's not why you go out and you shop for a guy. He can still play. Turns 36 in November. I get it. I don't know what you got to do for term. And what did he make last year, Matthew? You know the number. He made, what was it, 2 3/4? I wrote it down, but again, I have too much shit written
not a
down here
lot.
on this sheet. He made 2.75 last year. He's going to be due for a significant bump, and it's going to have to take a little term, I think, for Buffalo to attract him. But that's where I'm starting. I think it's going to be an early call they make. I think they were in on him. I think they were bummed when they didn't get him. I think it's clear he could have helped the team. Was he everything that they needed? And is he everything that they need now? No, not everything, but he's something. He's got experience. He checks a lot of those boxes. We've said it all last year. Guys that have been there, done that. I'm going to shut up. Matthew, you go. Patrick Kane, give me some thoughts.
Patrick Kane, they were in the mix to an extent. I think to your point, they will need to go multiple years on this if they want to get Patrick Kane. I'm convinced of that. I do think his preference would be to play for a legitimate contender, which the Buffalo Sabres are not. But I think term and money could sway that decision a little bit. I also think Patrick Kane is going to have suitors, obviously, after the way he played and what he's done in his career. Teams are going to want Patrick Kane, but it's not a one-man free agency for him anymore. And I do think that is helpful to the Sabres. I wonder, too, whether the Lindy Ruff addition is helpful to the Sabres. Patrick Kane had some familiarity with Don Granato, but also has the hockey acumen and knowledge of the league to know Granato is also, was a very unproven coach. Same goes for Kevin Adams as the general manager. So despite his familiarity, he was probably able to read the tea leaves and see what type of team the Sabres were early last season. Would his opinion change because of Lindy Ruff and the type of coach and the pedigree that comes with Lindy Ruff? And frankly, the coach that, Patrick Kane knew, growing up, as when he was watching the Sabres. So that part is interesting. I will also just preface the entire conversation with the idea that a top 6 forward like that really does make tinkering with the depth chart pretty fun. And I think that's something that we could probably get deep into when we, sit down and do a war room episode where we try to put together the dream off season for the Sabres and put together the depth chart. But I think starting with a top 6 forward is the right idea because those are going to be guys that fly off the board in free agency. And those are the ones you can impact your bottom 6 by making your top 6 stronger. Patrick Kane pushes Alex Tuck down the lineup potentially. And whether it is down the lineup in air quotes, but it is just spreading out your talent. And with Jeff Skinner off the top line, right? Jeff Skinner's not on the top line anymore if he's even, part of the plan. And so you need to find people that can play with him and kind of increase your depth in that way. So, yeah, I'm on board with Patrick Kane. Am I putting him in the realistic bucket is probably my big question because he turned them down not long ago. And he obviously wants to play for a contender. So how much can the hometown, how much can a little extra salary or a little extra term or Lindy Ruff some of these different variables sway him away from the fact that the Sabres haven't made the playoffs for 13 years and aren't a lock to do so next year. I think they've got a good shot, but they're not a lock. There might be better teams for him out there. He certainly liked Detroit. I'm sure Detroit will take a run at him. I don't think that's a marriage that's, completely over necessarily. So it's interesting. Like you said, it would make sense as an early call. I'm sure, they've got a pretty good relationship with that agency and have done a lot of business with them over the last few years. It's the same agency as Matthias Samuelsson, Owen Power, Kyle Okposo, probably a few others because it's the biggest agency in hockey, but enough business that, they probably have an idea where he stands. They're not picking up the phone July 1 and saying, let's see what happens. All right. You probably have a little bit of an idea. It's an interesting one, though.
I think
and to
Pat
your
owes
point,
Kevin a little favor there, going back
maybe,
to even Eichel.
right? Yeah. Like,
Pat Brisson,
yeah,
that is.
well,
It's not
yeah,
Pat Kane.
that's another good point. That was a very important piece of business they did, not a signing, but a trade. They certainly did Jack Eichel a favor there.
And they did Kyle Okposo a
big
favor too.
So maybe some of those start to come back your way. It's not a bad agency to have, some good relationships with.
Yeah.
It would change the
that's
dynamic, and the marketing aspect is impossible to ignore because
let's talk about that.
I was on the phone with you last night. I went down to the arena for the, I believe it was Blue and Gold Insights was what they called the event, with Lindy Ruff and Kevin Adams speaking to the fans, prospective season ticket holders and some season ticket members, taking questions from the fans. And the right idea, right? I think it's a good move on the part of the organization to try to connect with people in any way possible. But it has been interesting when they hired Lindy Ruff, the emphatic statement that it was not a nostalgia hire. And like we said, he has bona fides as a coach. He is a good coach, and I think the right coach for this team. But they are also leaning into the nostalgia, right? The ticket packages based on his jersey number. I saw a headline that he was calling some season ticket holders that, now.
Dude, he was cutting ticket promos like the day after his press conference, I think.
Right. So it doesn't hurt, right? And so they're aware of that part. The business part of this franchise is not in good shape. So when you can make strong hockey cases and the marketing is a bonus, as you could with Lindy Ruff and Patrick Kane, there might be some there. But Patrick Kane's got to be, on board with that. And the fact that he hesitated in the fall and winter makes me wonder. But the Sabres did.
I think it's realistic. I do.
Out of the gate, the Sabres struggled, right? I mean, Kyle Okposo talked about it after the fact, saying he could tell it was going sideways. And I'm sure Patrick Kane could see it. He's a sharp hockey guy. So that may have played into that more than, he wanted the situation to best show what he could do. He got it. And now he has a chance to really thread the needle and find a spot where maybe he can settle in and be comfortable for a couple of years. And what better place than home?
Well, of the premium offensive talent that's going to be available in unrestricted free agency. So again, we talked about Stamkos, Sam Reinhart, Jake Gensel. When you go down the list, Marchessault, I'll throw Lindholm in there. Premium. Yeah, I don't know. He's a 200-foot player to me. But Kane of those, seems the most realistic of those kind of marquee names. And you got to take a swing. That's kind of where I'm coming from. That's kind of the foundation for why I do think it's realistic. And there are the connections. Everything that you just said, I think makes sense to have the conversation, see where it goes. But that's enough on Patrick Kane. One thing I can say is that this isn't like others were wrong, because there was a lot of people that were against the idea of Kane to Buffalo in December. And, when the action started heating up. I do think a lot of those people are coming around a little bit. They think they understand that if that was a prove it deal with Detroit, he proved it. And even though he's up there in age, he's kept himself, I know he had a hip resurfacing, okay, but he's kept his body out of trouble for the most part in his career. He's got some tread on the tire. So if you gave him a couple of years, you might be able to get away with it. So then it comes down to dollars. Buffalo's going to have to overpay, though. How much is realistic? I guess we'll see. But I'm done on Kane. You got a guy that you want to talk about, or you want to keep talking about Kane?
So this is a guy that I am stealing off of your list. We were initially going to do this as sort of a mock draft of UFAs and each have our little pods of players, but it kind of makes sense to just discuss them as a unit. And the guy I would call first is Jake DeBrusk. And a lot of it, his body of work, we're talking about realistic targets, right? And he's going to be a commodity, I think, in free agency. He's been looking for a deal for a while, so he's probably going to really try to cash in here. He, you kind of leave an impression with your last performances, right? And in the playoffs, he left a hell of an impression, I think, on general managers around the league that are looking for, two-way players, tough around the net, that can get to areas that are competitive and raise their game at the most important time. All these things that we talk about the Sabres needing, other teams in the NHL need those things too. They're in short supply at times. But the work he does around the net, what he could bring to the power play, certainly being in Boston and playing, I think you have the number here in our notes, 86 playoff games in his career?
He's got a full NHL season of playoff experience, basically 86 games.
That would be such a boost to Buffalo's locker room. If there's a spot where you can overpay, you can even give some term. This is a guy that I think could fit. You could put him on the top line if you wanted to. Maybe he makes more sense on the second line, depending on how you want to split things up. But I do think he's comfortably a top 6 player. Maybe as he ages and other guys elevate, if you go with more term, you could put him on the third line because his game does translate. He can play with a lot of different kinds of players. And I think he showed, especially against the Leafs in the first round, what he could bring to the table. So that would be a call I make very early in the process because I think he is he just has a lot of the ingredients that this team is missing. And, maybe he's only a 25, in that 25-30 goal range, but that's a spot they would love to have on the power play, especially, what he can bring around the net.
Yeah, I think that the reason I had DeBrusk written down as kind of a second forward call was I just think he's a Buffalo type of player, and that's so cliche, and I get it, but two-way battler. It's kind of funny. I remember when he was drafted. So we were doing the draft show in the Lexus Club or whatever. That was that 2015 draft, the Eichel draft. So there's a lot of buzz. Boston had those 3 picks, right? They ended up taking, he was the only one that worked out. It was like Zach Senyshyn. They took Jakub Zboril and DeBrusk. And DeBrusk was a guy that I liked. All 3 of those guys went early. I thought DeBrusk was going to be a guy that, maybe even the Sabres could think about, like later on in that round, maybe hopping in. Because like what I say about him now is how we felt about him back when he was playing in the Western League. With that Western League thing. So I don't want to just totally regurgitate what you said, but I like the motor. I like the net front. Again, we talked all season long about guys that battle, and it's not just the net front. It's the corners, it's the walls, extending plays. Jake DeBrusk does all of that. I like that he's got a little bit more of that shooter in him. Sabres had a problem having wingers just like, get quality shots on goal last year. With that Western League connection, we talked about this. I could see DeBrusk doing very well on a line with Dylan Cousins. Hard driving center. I'm keeping Cousins at center. I had a conversation with someone earlier. They're like, what do you do with Cousins? You keep him at center, you move him to wing. I'm saying I'm keeping Cousins at center. I'll talk about moving Tage Thompson to wing before I'll talk about moving Dylan Cousins to wing. But to your point about the goals, he may top out at 25. I don't know if he has more than that in him, but it may also keep his cost down a little bit. So he's coming off a 2-year deal where he made, $4 million per, but a guy like that, I don't know what's you're going to have to pay him. There was some like hurt feelings there maybe too, when he, didn't he like hold out in Boston and like he wanted out, requested a trade maybe is what it was. I don't know if it was an actual holdout. I retract that. But I think there's an opportunity there to have a conversation about what he wants the next stages of his career to look like. I think the Sabres could certainly afford him based on some of the cap math that you shared at the top here. And there's some versatility there, again, just like what we say about Kane, slotting a guy like that, you can really have fun tinkering with different combinations. We may have to find a different role for Zach Benson next year if you get a guy like DeBrusk. But either way, these are all conversations that are good and healthy to have when you're talking about a Sabres team that hasn't been in the playoffs since who the hell was president last time, right? So, no, I'm on board with Jake DeBrusk. I do think that the price would be reasonable, again, just based on the forecast. I don't know if you're going to get any more out of him than what he's already produced, but as a player, totally on board. Totally on board with the concept. And he doesn't have to play with, Cousins, by the way. I'm just saying I can see it. I can visualize it. He's another guy who can play up top. Maybe you move Peterka around again. DeBrusk ended the year playing opposite Pasternak. So it's like he could, certainly play with, a variety of different player types. So I'm on board with that. But yeah, so thanks for stealing one of my guys. Thanks for citing the research and the preparation that I did, you prick. But no, we're on board. I think that we align. We agree a lot on this podcast. We'll probably disagree at some point here down the road, possibly even tonight. You may disagree with where I want to go next, because I do want to call a defenseman. I want to talk to an agent for a defenseman, and I have a kind of an idea in my mind of a reliable defenseman that can play in the top four. I already hinted at this. And when I was going through the list, and again, this isn't the end all be all. These are just, guys that I have in mind for what this offseason could look like and how it could take shape from Kevin Adams and his staff. And I was looking at the Winnipeg Jets, and a week ago, I was talking to you about Brendan Dillon, right? Well, Brendan Dillon's not the guy that I landed on, by the way. Okay. I went with a guy that's a little more reliable, high compete, right shot. He's up there a little bit older in age, but a player that I loved in juniors. He was a late round pick in the NHL draft, but I'm looking at a guy that can skate potentially at even strength with Dahlin, or at the very least in your top four. And that's Dylan DeMello. I think DeMello is very competent defensively. He has a history of working against top six forwards, super reliable. He stays healthy. He's played 75 plus games his last 3 seasons. But this is like an IQ, compete, defensive acumen. He's played with Josh Morrissey a lot, past year and a half, season and a half, 2 seasons. Maybe it would be attractive for him to come and play with another, world-class type of defenseman. And, he's coming off a contract. I think it was a 4-year deal where he was making 3 per. But there's a lot to like there. I just think there's steadiness, reliability, understated and underrated leadership with a player like that who leads by example, gets pucks out of the zone. He's not going to do too much offensively. He's got simplicity to his game offensively, but I love the competency. I even liked him when he was in Ottawa earlier in his career. I just think there's something there with him. I just think he's really underrated, and that's the type of guy that I can see the Sabres calling. I think that's most of kind of what I jotted down as far as why I like him. But I do think there's something there. If he paired well with Morrissey, you come here and say, hey, you might be able to pair with Dahlin or maybe, a Power. Well, someone like that. I think there's something there. Now, I know you're going to have a counter to the right shot, Dahlin. Go.
Well, Dahlin likes playing on the right. So to me, this leads to a bigger conversation about what you do with the blue line, the Sabres blue line, because everybody mentions off the top, they're loaded. They got 4 young studs, Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, Byram. All of them are left shots. And so unless you're planning on moving one of them out, having one of them on the right is a luxury. You're going to probably have to have more than one of them on the right. And Dahlin likes it and is comfortable over there. I don't know exactly where Lindy Ruff stands on having lefty righties. Don Granato obviously didn't care having lefties with lefties, but that does not deter me from the player. DeMello as a player can still fit. It still feels like they're searching for that guy who can play with Owen Power.
I want
right?
glue. I want steadiness. And it's not just about Darlene, by the way. I'm not trying to step on you, but there's a comment in here that I want to just throw up real quick. It's about Samuelson. Biggs, given our current contract setup, I can't see how we can go after another top 4D. I understand that. This is about Yoki Haru being in the top 4 where they ended. And it's also about me budgeting Matthias Samuelson to miss probably 18 games a season. It's like, I want to get a little more glue and competency defensively. I'm going to read the entire comment. We already have lots of money tied up into the blue line, moving Sam into the third pair. We've got Connor Clifton signed. Clinton, I totally get it. I think it's a call worth making. If you get a player of that caliber, you really have to strongly consider it. That's all I'm saying. Sorry, Matthew.
Well, and
Go
if
ahead.
you do, why I say it becomes a big blue line question is exactly what Clinton brings up there. You know, the money situation on defense is tight in a sense. So are the spots. It's where if you bring him in, you're probably getting rid of Henry Jokiharju, which is fine. You know, I think that's okay because let's say you have Samuelson and Darlene, you have Power and DeMello, you have Byram and Clifton. That can work. You know, all of a sudden you've got 3 pretty solid pairs, and the way it breaks up is a little bit better. Maybe you have Ryan Johnson as your 7th. You know, in this, you know, there is one while we're
Here's
on
a
the blue
crazy
line.
thing, Matthew, by the way. We haven't talked about trades yet. You could trade Matthias Samuelson potentially.
You could. I mean,
Not saying I want to, just saying
he
you could.
and I think he's a guy that you know teams are probably sniffing around on because of that contract is reasonable, and yet one that maybe the Sabres would want to move. Hasn't played a lot, but certainly has shown what he can do. You know,
I
playing
would
with.
hate it from the room perspective. Everyone loves him.
I would. Everybody loves him, of
Yeah.
course. There's no doubt about that. I would not be. Let's put it this way. This has nothing to do with Matthias Samuelson. I'm not worried about the room. I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm not worried about a room that hasn't made the playoffs.
Hasn't won. Yeah, I hear
I'm
you,
not
man.
worried about a room it's like protecting the fabric, right, of the team. What fabric? I'm not worried about the room. If in fact, if feelings were hurt, if eyes were opened, maybe all the better. Because if it can happen to Matthias Samuelson, it can happen to anybody. Not a reason to do it. I'm not.
Everyone liked Casey Middlestat.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He was very popular in the room. Yeah.
Matthias Samuelson, super popular in the room. But here's the other thing. The other reason I'm not super worried about that element of it is what you said. I mean, budgeting for him to miss how many games, right? I mean, he wasn't really in the room much this year. So he is an important guy. He is sort of the type of defenseman that they need more, you know, another one of, you know, a stay at home, reliable, you know, maybe he could use a little bit more of an edge as he continues to grow into his body and learn how to play and protect himself. But he has all the makings to grow into that rangy, shutdown type of defenseman. So
I like Samuelson. Listen, and I don't want to like light the bomb and like then like walk away. But like
no, but
you know,
his name
'cause I
comes
know-
up because teams have sniffed around because the blue lines all. I think after Byram, teams were wondering, like, you got all these young left-handed defensemen, you willing to give up that one? And I think they're not moving Darlene. Power would be a stretch. Those 2 guys they just signed, they just traded for Bowen Byram. So, naturally that name's going to come up. I don't think it's a crazy thing at all. But
I'm okay having a defenseman to talk to, like, and consider bringing a guy like DeMello in that he doesn't have to jump up in the play. He doesn't have to do too much offensively. He can hang back. When he's up in the play is when he doesn't look great, to be honest with you. I mean, like he can, like offensively, he's fine. He can contribute. He can put up points or simplicity. I'm talking about retreating, getting caught in the neutral zone. There's some things there. Like I'm not saying DeMello is a perfect defenseman by any means, but I love his defensive zone play. And I'm always willing to strengthen that if I can. But to be very clear, this is a move to address the Yoki Haru situation and not the Matthias Samuelsson situation. I want to be very clear on that.
Because, like I said, you
Nothing-
have Samuelsson, Dahlin, Power, DeMello, Byram, Clifton.
I have a greater comfort level with Dylan DeMello playing 21 or 22 minutes than I do Henry Yoki Haru right now.
So this is, I'll bring up 2 points that Lindy Ruff mentioned last night when he was speaking at the fan event. One was that the first thing he told Kevin was that they need to play better defensively. They need to be better in their own end, and that was going to be a real point of emphasis. What they get out of this group of defensemen, maybe they can get more because they have Lindy Ruff, but clearly this is going to be a point of emphasis, so I wanted to touch on that.
There's some chatters talking about. Oh, I just want to say, sorry, Matthew. There's some chatters talking about Matt Roy. You saw it in the show sheet. I said I look at Matt Roy here as well, but I personally have a preference for DeMello. I see Matt Roy from LA that can do a lot of things similarly. They're at a similar price range. DeMello was at $3 million. I want to say Roy was at like 3.5, somewhere around there. They're both, I think, are going to be popular. Winnipeg, by the way, is going to probably fight tooth and nail to keep DeMello. They'd be foolish to just let him go without putting up a fight, which means you're probably gonna have to pay to wow him, right? But Matt Roy is going to be a pretty popular guy, I think, also a little bit bigger and a little younger than DeMello. But sorry, you were going to say something else about the blue and gold insights.
Yeah, I'll touch on Roy in a second because he was actually the defenseman I was going to bring up. Probably would be my, if not DeMello, Roy would be my. Oh, he's one of my favorite guys out there
dude.
in this range, right? Like in this to have this type of impact. You know, you could get another depth guy, but that comes with its own risk because, you know, you get Connor Clifton, Ilya Lyubushkin, Eric Johnson. You know, you don't want to crowd the room with, you know, guys that might disappoint. So a little bit safer bet, I think, on DeMello or Roy. The other thing before I get back to Roy, the other thing Lindy Ruff said was when he was asked directly who Dahlin would play with, and all these questions, they were non-committal. They were trying to answer them without answering them in a sense. But the two names he brought up were Samuelsson and Power, not Byram. But another thing that you could do is have Byram with Dahlin up top, Power with DeMello, and Samuelsson with Clifton.
Mm-hmm.
Make Matthias Samuelsson re-earn it. And I actually don't mind Matthias Samuelsson as a third pair guy. And the other thing I think they need to be mindful of is that Bowen Byram is in the final year of his contract before he becomes an RFA. And part of what I think he didn't, you know, not that, you know, part of what I think was probably frustrating by the end in Colorado was that he was not sort of in a more featured role. So is he going to want to sign? Because Kevin Adams mentioned him last night as part of that next wave of core players who could, you know, be in line for extensions. How is he going to feel if he's playing a third pair role? So you need to find a spot that makes sense for him, which is hard to do when you have Dahlin and Power. It's a lot too much, not too much of the same thing, but you know, they all have slight differences to their game. But I liked Byram with Dahlin. I thought that worked really well. So I don't know. It's interesting how it all shakes out especially when you think about adding a defenseman to the mix. But of all the guys that they have at the moment, not a lot of them play the way DeMello plays. Maybe Matthias Samuelsson projects as that type of player, but hasn't been able to stay healthy. And even last year when he was healthy, didn't take that step that I think a lot of people were hoping. So you could argue that there is a real need for that. Now, you could shop in the tier below, like I said, where you find your I thought Connor Clifton had some of that potential too. Didn't realize it last year, but did play better toward the end of the year. Maybe with some more structure and with a different coach, he can elevate. And because that's, you know, the salary range he's in too. The Roy versus DeMello thing, splitting hairs a little bit. I like DeMello better. I also like DeMello better as a target because one guy's coming from LA, one guy's coming from Winnipeg. We are talking
Yeah, I
about
threw that stat up on the screen. James Campbell said DeMello was plus 46 this year.
above average.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Not bad. For one of the best defensive teams in hockey.
Good goaltending,
Good, yeah.
He's
decent. I remember that argument 12 months ago about whether this, all these, not just Sabres fans, but fans of different teams wondering whether they should go after Connor Hellebuck. Turns out he is as advertised. Didn't have the greatest playoffs, but he certainly made a lot of people around him look good. Point being, I think it's easier to probably attract a guy that played in Winnipeg than a guy that's currently living in LA. Maybe I'm wrong. Every guy's different, but
London, Ontario native, I want to say, by the way, on DeMello, if that matters. I'll have to check that. I don't have it up in front of me. I want to say, because I know he played, he was a Mississauga guy in the OHL. I think he's a London native. If that matters. I don't know if that matters. Patrick Kane's from Buffalo. He said no. I don't think it matters necessarily.
It doesn't totally matter, but I guess if a guy has, played in Winnipeg and made Winnipeg his home, it's easier for me to picture that guy embracing making Buffalo his home. A guy that's living on Manhattan Beach right now gets the phone call. Just feels like it might take a little more convincing. Again, maybe I'm wrong because every person is different, but part of what I like about targeting, DeMello is that he's played in Ottawa, he's played in Winnipeg. Like you said, he's from Ontario. Like, certain guys won't take a ton of extra convincing for Buffalo. And maybe he's one of them. I don't know. That's going to be personal for everybody, and there's certainly not a marquee destination on the ice. But, that's where Winnipeg too is just this crown example of it. As much as people think people don't want to come to Buffalo, people don't want to come to Buffalo because they're not good, right?
Yeah.
Plenty of guys have gone to Winnipeg, signed extensions in Winnipeg. Some guys have wanted out, but
they're thinking they're going to move back to Atlanta. I think
right. They're playing the long game. They're like, maybe we'll get back to Atlanta.
Gary keeps talking about that TV market. Before, just a real quick, because I mentioned Dylan, I'll close out with Brendan Dillon. I was on him earlier. I just like the player, the ruggedness, everything else. I got off him just because I think there's going to be too much competition for that player, that physical element. I think there was always, kind of like going back to like what you saw with Tanev, and I just thought that DeMello just made it more sense. And for some of the reasons that you just said, I think more likely to have an audience with the Dylan DeMello. That's it. What did you throw up here? Winnipeg makes Buffalo look like Manhattan Beach. Clinton, you're right. Woodlawn Beach.
That's what I'm saying. Take him to Woodlawn Beach on the free agent tour. Take him to Mickey Rats, and he'll think he's on Manhattan Beach.
Mickey Rats. Jeez. Okay. Who do you got?
Let's see. Let's talk about Ryan Lomberg. Let's move off the defenseman and let's get to Ryan Lomberg.
I love this.
People who have been listening know we've talked about Ryan Lomberg a few times, so we don't need to belabor the point too much. But I want to point out that he has not been playing a lot in the playoffs, which I think helps the Sabres case. Think you can get him for under $2 million. Think that's fair? I think you can get him for under $2 million. Maybe even under 1.8. I don't know that he's going to have a long list of suitors because he hasn't been able to. Kyle Okposo is, making a push to get a Stanley Cup here. He's helping the Sabres in a couple of ways. I know it's going to be another, salt on the wound type of thing if the captain leaves and gets his cup. But if they win, the Sabres get a 5th round pick instead of a 7th round pick. He's also pushing Ryan Lomberg out of the lineup, driving his value down, helping out, teams that are going to be looking for him in free agency. I think the Sabres should be all over Ryan Lomberg. We talked about the need for the Sabres to be shopping in the asshole aisle at the supermarket this offseason.
Kevin Adams walking down that like, excuse me, stock boy, where is the asshole aisle?
He
Right over there
needs
by
a
Ryan
couple of these
Lomberg.
guys.
Yeah,
If we're
that's right.
talking about 4 forward spots, I think 2 of them need to be devoted to guys that are just pains in the ass to play against. And this guy is it. The stat I had written down is among players with at least 600 minutes at 5-on-5. Lomberg was 15th in the NHL with just over 13 hits per 60 minutes of ice time. He is not a major offensive threat, but he is an animal on the forecheck. He has a ton of speed, and he really pisses the other team off.
He's a powder keg.
He starts stuff.
Yeah.
He'll fight. And I don't really care too much about the fighting, but he will just piss the other team off. And who on the Sabres, off the top of your head, is that type of player? Who pisses other team off? Who do other teams not like to play against in that way? You
Zach
could
Benson
say
and Jeff Skinner, and they're both
Jeff Skinner,
not big.
is a name that comes up,
Yeah.
but he pisses teams off in a different way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He's not pissing them off the way Lomberg does.
Right.
Benson is definitely, a bit of a gnat and can
Yeah.
get under people's skin. And the other guy that I think is at the top of the list for me as far as tough to play against and willing to play that way is Dahlin.
Oh, for
I
sure.
think
Yeah, for sure.
he's that guy. But who's mean, I guess, is the point. Who are the mean guys on the Sabres? Dahlin.
Yeah, let me think about this for about an hour and a half, and I might come back with a name. Yeah,
It's
Dahlin,
just
yeah.
Dahlin. It's just Dahlin and Clifton.
And by the way,
And
that is like not anywhere near the top of the list of words I would use to describe Rasmus Dahlin. That's the
No,
problem. That's what
and
you're
it
saying.
shouldn't be the top of the list of his priorities on a nightly basis either. You could throw Connor Clifton in there, but in the forward group, I guess Peyton Krebs likes to fancy himself a bit of an instigator, but he doesn't have the speed that Lomberg has or the tenacity just yet, the strength to
He
pull it
doesn't have the
off.
heaviness to his game.
Right. So of this bucket, we're going to talk about a lot of these bottom 6 guys because I think that's where the meat of the shopping will get done. And Lomberg would be a priority for me because I just think that role that he could fill, it's wide open. And I think Lindy Ruff knows the importance of those types of players. He's probably seen plenty of this guy. And there shouldn't be too much trouble convincing him because he's never had a big payday. So overpaying Ryan Lomberg by 600,000, 500,000 will matter for a guy that
It's going
doesn't
to take
have big career earnings.
So the devil's advocate on this one is like Ryan Lomberg can't do it all by himself. He's going to need help. There's some backup there that he has. Sam Bennett's a prick. There's guys like that are in that lineup that have a little bit of edge to them where, Matthew Tkachuk, he's got guys that are out there stirring the pot with him. It can't just be Lomberg if you do it, so like Kevin Adams can't go for one. You call it what do you want, an asshole, a dickhead, whatever. You got to have a couple of them. And what you just said kind of scares me on behalf of Ryan Lomberg. Like, okay, yeah, I'm one guy. What else are you going to do? You got to weave more of me into the fabric. I just want to throw that out there because some of the other guys that I've written down are in that bucket of players, at least at the section of the lineup, but they don't have that element that you have. Now, some of that toughness, some of that grittiness in your face, drag your teammates into stuff, I have as more maybe trade target stuff. There's 2 guys, you can see them on the list. We're not going to talk about them tonight. We're going to get to them, I think, later. Those are more dream scenarios, they're probably pipe dreams. In free agency, though, yeah, I just want to throw that out there as something to chew on. Can't be a one-man show. Can't be a one-man show. We've seen Jordan Greenway get involved a little bit, but it's almost like there's some reluctance to do so.
He's not mean. He is
He's pretty chill.
Yeah. He's very chill. He's a good dude. He's a guy that people like in the room, and he is a good, valuable. Like he's not easy to play against, but he's not mean. He's not even real willing to he's just not that guy. He's just not. As far as that extra edge that's sort of dragging the team into it in that regard. But I like the role Jordan Greenway plays, and I would like Jordan Greenway on a wing opposite Ryan Lomberg, actually. Because I don't think Jordan Greenway is unwilling to necessarily like be the second guy into the scrum and, take care of things. I just don't think he wants to be, the first guy in.
The
all
leader of the
time.
pack. Yes.
But he's tough. He just does it in a different way. I wouldn't mind him opposite. A lot of these moves, it's like, let's find a way to push Jordan Greenway down the lineup into a more appropriate role instead of, it's at one point he was a top 6 center. I think at some point last year things got weird with this team, but he was certainly pushed farther up the lineup than he should have been. And so it's just about finding the right roles for everybody. And Jordan Greenway is going to stand a little taller if there's a Lomberg on his opposite wing. And that's where I'll kick it back to you because like you said, you can't just grab one of these guys. I think you need to be spending a lot of time in this aisle.
You do. And it's not just going to be in free agency. You also have to draft them. I don't want to spin off onto a draft tangent, but part of the reason I'm willing to use 11 as currency is because a lot of the things that they need in the prospect ranks, you get later in the first round, you get in day 2. They could be B-level offensive prospects that are high compete, motors, in your face, sandpaper, grit. Not a lot of those guys in the first round. You get those guys on day 2, and I'm okay starting the draft there from the Sabres. But anyways, I'm staying in this section of the lineup, like I said, for the next 2 guys that I had written down. They're nowhere near. They might be like not even really adjacent to that aisle, the aisle that you find Lomberg in. But they're hardworking, though. They're committed, all over the ice players. And the first one that I'm looking at now, this is my shortcoming as a hockey watcher is that I get attached to prospects in their draft year. And the player that I like here now is now 28 years old, but I liked him 10 years ago when he was in his draft year. He was a 3rd round pick in the NHL draft coming out of the OHL, another Ontario League guy. And he's bounced around a little bit, was on waivers, found a home recently. And I just think that there's always been something to this player. Maybe now that I think he's 28 years old, I'm pretty sure. He's probably like in his prime right now. Let me just verify the age real quick. Yeah, he's 28. Just turned 28 last month. Mike Amadio played most recently in Vegas. Came in with the Kings, did a little tour with the Maple Leafs. Got waived by them, want to say, picked up. And if you go back last year, so Amadio has back-to-back 27-point seasons. He's a guy that he's another guy that can get to the net front. I asked you to look at his viz, right? And what did you come back with and say? It's very heavy in front of the net, right?
Yeah.
Matches the eye test.
He's a net front guy.
Net front guy. He could score goals. When you go back to the beginning of last year in terms of like cost per point, he was like one of the best in the league. Now he faded off a little bit, but he still finished in the top 50 in that category. And dirty areas, 0.86 goals per 60, draws penalties, blocks some shots, but he just embraces that grind in all areas of the ice. So like when I hear Kevin Adams talk about changing the identity, here's a guy who's won a cup. He can manage a 3rd line winger role if you want a guy like that. I know he's not going to excite a lot of people. He excites me just because he plays the game hard and he can kind of do a lot of things that maybe we didn't see this team do last year. Cummings, okay.
Our associate GM here.
Okay, good. I'm glad that Cummings sees it because I just think that there's something there, and I think you might be catching a guy at the right time. The other thing I like about Amadio is he only made $762,500 last year. Not going to be breaking the bank here. Now, he's definitely due for a bump. But, you're not going to be paying him, multiple schmil, maybe a couple, he's due for a raise. But I just think there's something here with this player, plays the right way. All those coaching cliches that you hear all the time that seem to be missing. He cares. Go and call him and bring him in. I'm surprised that I'm kind of surprised that Cummings had him. Well, maybe I'm not, because Cummings he's pretty good at this. But I don't know. I didn't hear his name talked about a lot, but he was one that kind of jumps out at me.
He is on Chris Johnston's big board at The Athletic of top 50 free agents, which I found interesting. Snuck in the 40s somewhere. And, when we were talking about him earlier this week, when you brought his name up, I mentioned that this is what you're looking for in the sense of identifying the next guy. And not necessarily. So a few names that we haven't mentioned. Dakota Joshua is one, right?
Yeah.
Dakota Joshua, I really like as a player. Dakota Joshua has now reestablished his value up a tier, right? And what he did in the playoffs, I think, particularly could earn him some extra salary. You're looking for the next Dakota Joshua. You're trying to
good point.
Flex your pro scouting muscles. This is when you make your money as a pro scout, is look at Florida. Look at Florida's roster and the pro scouting that has been done down there.
Yeah.
Ryan Lomberg was not a Florida original. A lot of these guys weren't, but a lot of them were really under the radar in general and became, big time players, Montour for Hagee to an extent. So
thank you for mentioning that on the next one thing. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's how I wanted to tee up the Amadio thing, saying, look, I think we both agree that we would love the Sabres to go out and get a Dakota Joshua. There's another player are you going to talk about the other player that I had written down that I don't think you're going to get, but maybe you might want to take a run at? Because I think that those are like two names. There's two names that fit that type of player that I just don't think they're going to get a chance at. And that's how you got to go down to Amadio. But I'll tell you what, honestly, I'm putting Amadio, he's right there almost in that same level of player. He scored some clutch goals in the playoffs too, man. That game that Vegas clinched the cup that year, I want to say he scored a goal in that game. Scored a game winner in the series against, I think they played Winnipeg that year in game 3, something like that. My memory's fuzzy, but there's little moments in time with Amadio that kind of pop out. It's yeah, that's the guy.
Stefan Nason is the name that I believe you're referring to.
It is.
I think if you could hand pick, what you're looking for, he's it. I
didn't want to Matt Roy you. That's why I didn't want to say it, because you wanted Matt Roy, and I was like, I don't think you're going to get Matt Roy. But go ahead.
But this is kind of, I think he's likely to stay in Carolina. And if he doesn't, he's another one that he's used to playing on a contender. A contender is probably going to want him. He's 31 years old, so his price shouldn't be crazy. But again, a guy that is just tough and plays in the tough areas in front of the net, plays both ends of the ice. He'd be, in a lot of ways, exactly what I'm looking for. You brought up those hockey viz, heat maps that are good on Amadio. They're fantastic for Nason. He is all over the front of the net, and you can use that in a lot of different ways. So, but I like the idea of Amadio in the sense that I don't think he'll be a commodity in the same way that Dakota Joshua or Nason, if he hits the free agent market. Or I don't know, there's a few other names that we can throw in on the bottom 6.
Yeah, I have one more there too. You know that, right?
There's a bucket. There's Yakov Trenin is another one that
he's going to be very popular, I think, in the fan base just for the style of play. I agree.
He hits, he fights. He had 167 hits last year. Great forechecker. Made some great plays for Colorado in the playoffs this year. that's, a guy I think that makes sense. I've brought up Kiefer Sherwood to you a few
Yep.
times. 214 hits at 5-on-5 this season, 10th most among forwards in the NHL. And so there's another thing about guys like Amadio, guys like Sherwood that I'll bring up that I think is missing on this team. And what I love about Sherwood is how much, and Lomberg applies here. Almost any of these guys that you find in these roles, they've bounced around. They've scratched and clawed and had to fight for everything in their NHL career. I think they could use a little bit more of that. There's a lot of guys on the Sabres. Some of this because of development strategy of Don Granato and Kevin Adams. Some of it has worked, but there's a lot of guys on the Sabres who have just been handed ice time and roles. And when you talk about changing, the attitude in your locker room and changing the attitude you play with, that I think is a fun element to add to the mix. Connor Clifton fits in that boat in a sense but he was still a big recruit. He was a development program guy, but he had to fight his way onto the development program. He went to college, didn't have any NHL offers when he left, but stuck in one place. Some of these guys have just bounced around and really had to fight to stay in the league and find different ways to be effective. How many guys on the Sabres can say that? I mean, we can talk about Tage Thompson's journey, right? It wasn't the easiest journey by any means, but he was a first-round pick.
Yeah. There's a country club element there.
And he got to be a top 6,
Yeah.
center. Outside of that, I mean, who are we talking about as far as guys that have scratched and clawed to earn what they have?
Not many of them. You can
And
talk about their journey maybe as young players, like
sure,
young kids,
everybody
like
has had to
Dylan
work
Cousins, you
hard.
know what I mean? Yeah.
Everybody has had to work hard to get to the NHL on some level.
Right.
We're talking about a
I know what
roster
you're saying though. Like
loaded
there's
with first-round picks and a lot of opportunities simply handed out. Like I said, some of it was shrewd strategy by Don Granato to rebuild confidence in some of these players. But I think Lindy Ruff is going to be drawn to some of these guys that have really had to earn it in a different way and taken a different path. You have a lot of guys who have a pretty similar path to the NHL right now on Buffalo's roster. I mean, you got 3 defensemen who were top 5 picks. So that's a pretty, straightforward path to the NHL. So I don't know. I'm attracted to that element. Give me some guys that have earned it before and can show some of the younger players what that looks like and maybe make them feel it a little bit. Maybe Peyton Krebs, the best can, come out of Peyton Krebs if he's in the press box, not because he needs to look at the game from up top and all this, but it's because somebody took his spot. That to me, and so that's a long tangent on Kiefer Sherwood, but he's had a journey. And Trennan is another one. And the last one I'll throw in before I kick it back to you, because I know you have one that you like to maybe center down there. But
yeah.
Christian Fischer
Yeah.
is another under the radar guy that, plays in front of the net. Simple, hard game, probably comes real cheap from the Red Wings. Not a flashy signing, but one that I think can round out your forward group. Maybe not, the heaviest, toughest, but plays a tough game. And he stood out when I was watching, Sabres games against the Red Wings this year.
Gargalant, before I jump in on one, I hear you on Fisher. I'm not opposed. By the way, I didn't want to skip over what you said. I was just looking at this comment about Gargalant because we've talked a little bit about William Carrier in the past. I think we both agree we like William Carrier. I would be more than open to him being an addition to this team as long as he can stay healthy. When you look at William Carrier's last couple of seasons, 52, 63, 56, 39 this past season. But no, as a player, loved him when he was here, hated to see him go when he did. That was an expansion draft casualty, and for good reason. You know, they were building a team out there right from the get-go, and they saw a player like that as key, and he's been really good for Vegas. Just the health, it's been nonstop. Even like when in his draft year he was hurt. There's just always kind of injuries following that guy around, but love him as a player. Got to stay healthy. My last guy that I wrote down, it's more of a question. It's more of a question for you, question for the chat. Is there room for a defensive specialist as a fourth line center, or maybe even a guy that you can plug up to your third if you have to kind of give him those minutes? Because when I look, it's a left-handed centerman. He's kind of bounced around between a couple teams. So I'll give you kind of the pedigree. Was a former second-round draft pick, played prep at Shattuck St. Mary's, went to Minnesota State. Second-round draft pick by the Pittsburgh Penguins. A couple years there. Then he went out to Vegas. It's part of a cup run there. Wasn't eligible to get his name on the cup, but they petitioned to get his name on the cup. And then just spent his past season with the Vancouver Canucks. I'm talking about Teddy Bluger. You're going to be moving one Latvian out potentially in Zemgus Girgensons. Would you bring another one in? I like the fit purely from my lens for that just defensive forward, a guy that knows his role, very competent in it, defensive zone starts, pretty good on faceoffs. Again, a guy that you look at to round out your depth. Is he like the first guy you're calling? No. But what I wrote down for him too is I see him as a fourth line fit with Greenway as a possible line mate. He turns 30 in August, seasoned. I think he is what he is, but I would feel very comfortable with him improving your defensive acumen and your forward ranks in the bottom half of the lineup. It's more of a question. Would you be interested in a player like that, Matthew, but also the chat?
I don't mind that fit. I think one thing that we will get maybe deeper into when we truly project what they'll do in the roster and how it could all fit together. Who's your third line center?
Right now, yeah, I'm not going to answer. It's rhetorical.
I mean, right now, I guess it's Peyton Krebs, right?
Yes.
And I don't think you can roll that out on opening night. I'm not giving up on Peyton Krebs, but I'm not banking on Peyton Krebs. And I think it's important that the Sabres do the same. They did that. They did too much of that last summer, banking on not just Peyton Krebs, but other guys to either repeat or improve. And when it didn't happen, the bottom fell out of this team. You need to reinforce the depth. And so a third line center could be very important. Can Bluger be that guy? Maybe it's a little higher in the lineup than you want him, but that's where you start to ask the question, does a prospect fit in yet? Can Savoy or Kulik be ready for that type of a role? Maybe a little bit too early, but that is the next step as we've put together this board of free agents and guys we like and fitting the puzzle together. That's a big piece that's kind of missing.
So every time we talk about the prospects, okay, so Rusic's got the one way. We always talk about Kulik and Savoy. And I think that Kulik will take a decent run at it. He showed some really nice development in Rochester this year with everything but, the scoring. He was better. He was relied upon in different situations that you couldn't put him out there when he was 18. Just turned 20, by the way. Still kid, He improved. He still has some work to do to improve, but I think he'll take a run at it. Why are we not talking about Isak Rosén as a guy? Like, if you go out and you trade for a third line center, you got to figure out what to do with Krebs. I can make an argument that Rosén might be able to really do something there with that bottom six wing spot versatility with the wheels on the PK. He shoots the puck, something Krebs doesn't do. I don't know. I just want to food for thought. I don't want to go all over the place. We're talking about free agents, but it's always Kulik, Savoy. We got to talk more about Rosén too, I think, as far as training camp. And, could he cook a little more? Yeah. I just don't want to forget about him because of the versatility that he showed also. Sneaky good with the stick. Just does some little, coaches talk about details, all that stuff. Kind of got that. But anyways, I don't
I
want
was
to go
thinking
there.
about the guys that fit at center, right? Because you're trying to fill
Yeah.
a center
Well,
spot.
because you're talking about like who's your third line center. The reason that I start drifting over to Roseanne is like that's probably the trade episode.
Right. I think it is. I think you trade for either a third line center or a top 6 center and push push Dylan Cousins down and really spread out your depth in a major way. But that would require a big, big trade that maybe there's one that we've daydreamed about a little bit, but I don't know how realistic it would be. But
I have 4 guys on my trade board. You know what I mean? You're going to have probably 4 or 5 also, but yeah, I don't know, man. But like to bring it back to Bluger, I know he ended the year. I think playing third line minutes for Vancouver, not really where I see him in Buffalo. I think I see him probably on that fourth, some little PK sprinkle in there.
I think so. I think it's a better spot. I think the only other part of this discussion that makes me think of is, would they let the market play out and maybe leave the door open with Girgensons? And maybe is Girgensons not a foregone conclusion to leave? We'll see. Because I guess he could play some center if you needed him to. And maybe he's better if he's got better line mates and more
just
structure.
Special.
He's important.
He's important.
There's something
I'm not making fun of Kevin.
him.
I'm not making fun of Kevin, but yeah, it was the timing of that'll always just kind of stick with me. It's on that day, it hits you in the face when he said it,
That's why you can't close the door. And he's also, he's never played for Lindy Ruff, I don't believe. He got here right after Lindy got fired.
Lindy got canned in 2013.
Oh, I do. Well, we're not doing trades yet. Brian Cummings is breaking the rules in the chat, but I do love this. This is the third line center, Radek Fox. So,
you're going to take the guy that they said Dallas took between Grigorenko and Girgensons? Fox was 13 in 2012. That was the Pittsburgh draft.
He's got a history with Lindy. He likes Lindy.
Yeah.
I'm sure Lindy likes him. He's a good player. That's a good tease for the next episode, because I think trade targets deserve their own kind of room to breathe, because there's going to be a lot of different variables that go into that. And then I think, we can talk about the number 11 pick, because there's a question I've posed to our prospect writers at The Athletic that I'm curious to get your take on in regards to that. That feels like it could be another hour conversation, talking about the number 11 pick and the trade value of it and the repercussions of trading it and how it fits into the rest of the prospect pool and affects the 2024-2025 roster. So we got to leave some meat on the bone, right?
Oh, I'm game for that. I'm ready to go right now. We should get off and end this and then record that and put it out on its own video. But no, we wouldn't do that to the chatters. But no, I agree. Good little cliffhanger there. So no, again, guys, like these are just names. They're not the only names. I think that kicking the tires on some of the bigger guys is totally worth it. There, obviously it would be great to get a Lindholm, a Stamkos, a Marchessault. Of course it would be. I just don't see it happening, guys. So I wanted to just try to throw out some names where I think you could honestly take a run at them and maybe get their attention. And I think that's how you approach this also, Matthew. Good work. I like what you came up with. I don't like that you stole Jake DeBrusk. It was kind of a dick move, but I understand why you did it, because we just both happen to like the player. So that's fine. It's good to agree.
Maybe that's
a sign. The record. Yeah.
Maybe that's a sign that he's the guy.
Maybe. He doesn't come without concerns, though, too. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't come without concerns. But at any rate, are we good? We went $120. Man, I said, well, we'll go 45 minutes, maybe an hour tops. Here we are.
I'm not sure we're capable of 45-minute shows. We talk about them a lot, but we never execute them.
Well, with that said, I'm not even going to go into the chat.
We kind of dabbled in the chat. The chat was kind of like our war room. These were our scouts, shouting
If
names.
you want to go in there and finish it up, go ahead.
As we dabbled in there. We were pulling some stuff out. They were discussing amongst themselves some different names, and there was a lot of trade talk in there. So I think we
Those
can go back
bastards.
through that. Yeah, they were breaking the rules. We said it was free agency, and they went for some of the trades. But I think there's some of that stuff that we should table.
I did star a few early, by the way. Rob Wise, good friend of the show, mentioned William Carrier, very first chat, and Nico Kubel. He's along the same lines of just getting those guys that kind of play tough, have some skill with them also. He also mentioned Jordan Martinook. Again, I just think that's like Martinook and Martinook, whatever. And Nason. They're just like part of that fabric in Carolina. And with Brendan Moore staying, I just think they're going to keep that band together. I'm not sure, about those guys leaving. That's why I kind of stayed away from that section of the class. Other than that, the roll call was going here. We got people in here from West Virginia. Dietz is in here from Florida. Good crew as always tonight. And there was one other one, Matthew. Max Medwin was in the chat very early on, throwing a little shout out your way. He was crushed when John Vogel left the Athletic. Matthew, you've done an incredible job filling his big shoes. Thanks for all the great content. I wanted to throw that up because it's absolutely true. You completed another great season of coverage on the beat. I speak on behalf of the chat and the Sabres fans, and thank you for that. And with that, now that I'm done washing your balls here, I'm going to say good night. You do your plugs, Matthew.
I appreciate that from you and from Max and anybody who has read. It was not easy to fill John Vogel's shoes. I still feel like I wake up every day figuring out how to do it. And I know that he built up quite an audience. So it was, I take a lot of responsibility in making sure I don't totally drop the ball there. So no plugs. I got the plugs out of the way at the top. Like the video, subscribe to the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on all your platforms. Leave us a 5-star review and say whatever the hell you want in the comments. The algorithm can't read, as far as I know. Not yet.
I forgot to do that at the top. So thank you for doing that. I didn't.
Smash
I just
the
jumped right
like
in.
button.
I was like, oh man, yeah. Hit the like button, people. Yeah.
Comment below on this video who your top target would be.
That's right.
On both offense and defense, maybe.
You're getting good at this YouTube thing. You're not going to need me to host a show anymore.
I'm trying. And you can go to theathletic.com Sabres and check out what we've got going on there. I was pulling double duty at One Bills Drive and downtown at the arena this week. Lots of off-season content to come. A couple pieces up there already, some draft stuff, some cap stuff, some trade targets to come. If you can't wait until Chris and I get back together here on the show, I will have some written trade targets before that. And yeah, and other than that,
feel free to steal mine for that if you want. Just because that's what you do. I'll leave the chat with this. I'll leave everyone with this. Papa Duke coming at us from lovely Appalachia asks, what is Billy Lano doing? I have the Billy Lano stick that I use to clear out icicles. Best damn icicle remover in the village of Hamburg. I'll bring it out and Billy Lano will make an appearance on the next podcast.
Speaking of John Vogel, he had the great story on what Billy Lano is doing. This was a few years ago now, so I can't say for sure what Billy Lano is doing, but John Vogel went and visited him in Finland, and he had a clothing brand at the time, and he got the scoop. So it all ties together.
I can't quit the chat. Coda, I'm a fan of Coda, says Roseanne's release is underrated. Absolutely. Coda, it looks like sometimes he's going to serve up a muffin, doesn't it? And it just pops off his blade. It's incredible. Effortless.
How about this?
And that's, yeah.
This would be a fun
that's
topic
on the trade.
for the next
that's
show.
On the trade. That's a trade.
I know.
Yep. Yeah. He wants out. We'll talk about that one.
I'm giving Clinton the chatter of the night, by the way. I think he was the most engaged, brought some good ideas to the table. I think he got pulled up onto the screen here the most. So chatter of the night.
Yeah, Clinton did a good job tonight. I don't recognize that. Is this Clinton's first time in here? I don't recognize
I don't know.
Clinton. I recognize a lot of these other ones, but we'll remember you, Clinton. Thanks for contributing to tonight's show. For Matthew Fairburn, Sabres beat writer for The Athletic. For the production crew out of my, I don't know, in front of my house, probably sweltering. I was sweating my ass off walking my dogs earlier. I'm Chris Baker. We'll see you again next time.